This is where the story ended, at Estoril in Portugal. By the time the story reached here, it was a fairy tale. There were only two contenders for the World Championship, the new boy and the old hand. But the race for the great prize is really never that simple. At the end of the season, everyone knows everything. At the start of the season, nobody knows anything. And it started in Rio. Balestri of Fisa and Eccleston of Foker, chalk and cheese. Tombay, Piquet and Mansell, what event could bring such different men together? What event but Rio's pre-race beauty contest? There was a lot of learned comment from the Grand Prix circus about bottoming, fuel injection and the ground effect. As was appropriate, only 3 of them got as far as the victory dais, and the contest culminated in an orgasmic splurge of champagne, the other fuel on which Formula One runs. Then it was down to the serious stuff. The cars were roughly the same as the year before, except now they were nearly all turbos. Form was hard to predict. So was what would happen under the new fuel rules. Unlike the champagne, the petrol was rationed to 220 litres per car, per race, per haps, because the rules specified the size of the tank, so that if you could freeze the fuel to pack more of it in, good luck. Otherwise, it was a matter of electronic engine management, meaning the onboard computer, if you had one, told you how high you could crank up the boost without parking inadvertently. It was all part of the onward march of technological progress, which is exclusively devoted to making Grand Prix cars go a bit slower, so that the spectators can still see them. One of the spectators was Carlos Reutemann, a dropout. Still all the way in was world champion Nelson Piquet, quicker than anyone in the car, quicker than anything, Gordon Murray's Brabham BMW. But Renault's fuel cooling plant looked hard to beat. Either the temperature below zero or the price per cubic centimetre in francs. Practice, and Mansell showed how a Lotus could run rings around a McLaren. Eager on the grid, the Loti were cooled down with ice cubes. The McLarens kept their fuel cool with silver foil. Waiting for the green light, De Angelis's Lotus was on the pole. But when the green light went, Piquet stalled, Alboretto's Ferrari was away first with Warwick's Renault behind it, and Mansell in the other Lotus came booming down the outside. The new McLaren combo of Prost and Lauda had qualified only 4th and 6th, so it was a bit too soon yet for them to be up front in contention, but you couldn't take it away from Alboretto that he had started mighty well in his first race for the prancing horse. Since it was also Warwick's first ride for Renault, the 1984 season had started with a nice new look. Just behind Alboretto and Warwick were the 2 Loti, with Lauda making plans to get past them, his McLaren temporarily going better than Prost's. So they all came down the straight with the crowd madly cheering the only driver they cared about, Piquet, who was down at the back somewhere nearly last, although less nearly all the time. As Alboretto continued to cover himself with glory far ahead, Prost, in his first drive for McLaren, got faster. He went past Arnoux. Lauda caught up with Warwick but banged wheels with him going past, a contact fated to have large long-term consequences for Warwick. Alboretto's luck ran out when his front right brake overcooked, locked up and threw him spinning off the road. He kept revving and rejoined the race. Prost went past Tombay, whose high-tech radio link with the Renault pit had conked out, meaning that mission control couldn't tell him the secret of how to go as fast as he needed to without using up more gas than he'd got. Alboretto's brake was by now glowing like a waffle iron. All the other cars could stop and go. Alboretto stopped, in the pits, so that the heat could be taken out of the affected area. Piquet, keen to please the home crowd, who had eyes for no one else, kept going places until lap 31, when he parked in front of the grandstand so that they could cheer him continuously. Mansell was still thrusting along in 3rd place, but Prost, going ever faster, took it off him. Warwick had stopped for tyres, so Lauda was in the lead, which always looks like the most natural thing in the world until you remember how long he's been doing it. But Prost was still coming up. Finally he came past even Warwick, so now it was McLaren's first and second, which was the world's first experience of what was to become a familiar phenomenon. Tom Bay arrived for new tyres in a beautiful slalom turn, for which the Renault data processing centre was not prepared. Arnoux Ferrari blew a turbo. Prost came in for new tyres. It was a long stop, but not as long as Lauda's, who had come in just behind him. Lauda's onboard Bosch Motronics had packed up, some say because of misleading signals sent by a malfunctioning washing machine in downtown Rio. Lauda got out of the car. Warwick, now back in the lead on softer tyres, powered on. All the Renault computers were in agreement that nothing could possibly go wrong. Rosberg won a tussle with De Angelis for third spot, but something had gone wrong with Warwick's Renault. Long ago, when Lauda brushed wheels with him, the injured suspension had finally come adrift, and after spinning off, Warwick limped home saying some of the new French words he'd learned into his helmet radio. So Prost ran out the winner. And Tom Bay ran out of gas, a triumph of the new French rules over Renault's new French computers. Prost, justifiably pleased, said, "I can do it again, no hands."
I think I proved today that I was as competitive than last year with the Renault, and I think we proved today together with McLaren team and Michelin tire and the TAG Porsche engine that we are very, very competitive this year, and I hope to win Field Championship because I lost for 2 points last year, and I do a very, very good beginning of season, and I hope to continue in the same step.
Down at Kyalami in South Africa, the Lions were listening to strange noises. Speed counts at Kyalami. On the long straight, the Formula One cars do 200 miles an hour and don't go very much slower through the subsequent curves. In practice, Piercarlo Ghinzani, going flat out through the Yusuke sweep for the first time with full tanks, clipped the curb. His Osella went up like Vesuvius. Manfred Winkelhock got out of his ATS and went to take a look. The Osella was atomized, but Ghinzani miraculously remained intact. Meanwhile, Patrick Tambay wiped his hot shoes so as not to soil the immaculate workings of the Renault team's space shot technology. A satellite link to the Élysée Palace. To the casual observer, Renault looked all weighed down with being up to date. Piquet was on the pole. He was still on it when everyone else went past. But by the first corner, he had caught up to Rosberg. After changing cars at the last minute, Prost had to start from the pit lane, the prelude to an epic drive. In the early stages, it was a question of how long Rosberg, whose Williams Honda was not handling to his liking, could hold off Piquet. Not long. Piquet scorched off ahead. Very soon his teammate Fabi was riding shotgun. For cars still fully loaded with fuel, the Brabhams were going awfully fast. But Lauda, who had started in a gentleman's 8th position, was working his way inexorably upward in what was to become part of his pattern. Fabi, having blistered his tyres with too much of that fuel-heavy initial speed, Lauda went by and closed on Piquet. Piquet put up his hand and begged to be excused. It was the same story as with Fabi. Tyres worn out early. Later on, both the Brabhams went out with engine trouble, which was to become the story of their lives. Prost, having made up much ground, gave some of it back when he came in for tyres, with Tom Bay just behind him. Lauda powered on at the front. Stops just for tyres weren't as much fun as the previous year's stops for fuel as well, but a quick change was still crucial. To emphasise the fact, Tom Bay took the quick way out through Prost's pit. Rosberg got away less smoothly. De Angelis came in, the Renault engine of his Lotus spitting fire through its turbo. Out on the road after a tyre change, Warwick overtook Alboreto, whose Ferrari was slowed by its own wing, which couldn't be set for speed or the car would have come off, like Beloff's Tyrrell. The Formula One car became a dirt track dragster, but the same shunt could have killed him if the dirt hadn't been there. Tom Bay ran out of petrol all over again and said things to the inside of his helmet which must have caused red faces in his pit and back at the Renault factory, which was undoubtedly patched in on the same wavelength. Lauda headed for the finishing line. He got there a few yards and a whole lap before Warwick, who was nevertheless in third place. Prost had worked all the way up to second spot and was the only car on the same lap as his teammate. Anything as fast as the McLarens fell apart. Anything as reliable finished later. The first race in Europe was in Belgium, at Zolder, where Gilles Villeneuve had been killed 2 years before. His empty helmet is still there. But the race goes on. The Ferraris were happier than in South Africa, and Alboreto took the pole, with his teammate Arnoux just behind him. Ferrari team manager Forghieri was much in evidence. On the green light, Rosberg screwed up, Piquet took to the grass, and Warwick's Renault got between the Ferraris before the first corner. The three of them finished the race in that order, Alboreto, Warwick, Arnoux, but there were some adventures on the way. Winkelhock, indecently fast in the old ATS, was in close touch, followed by De Angelis, Patrese Alpha, Prost, Cheever, Piquet, and so on, all the way back to Rosberg, in 21st place and furiously determined to do something about it. Frost trickled in after 5 laps, the electronics having presumably been neutralized by some spectators' Sony Walkman. Rosberg, on the other hand, was going faster all the time. He went past everybody up to and including Tom Bay. Piquet was also eager to improve and brilliantly demoted Arnoux. Cheever, who had driven his Alfa well up to 5th place, was ill rewarded. Piquet was still reeling them all in, but Rosberg was threatening to reel in Piquet. For 2 laps he made a thorough pest of himself until Piquet made an uncharacteristic boob, letting Rosberg through. Pit stop time, and Warwick changed to softer tyres, but they were to bring him no closer to the flying Alboreto. Alboreto only once put a wheel wrong. In the days of the ground effect, it would have put him out, but now it only brought him in for new wheels. Alboreto was stationary for only 11 seconds, but those were 11 seconds in which Rosberg was getting better at coming second. When Alboreto went out again, however, he was still in 1st place. When Rosberg came in, he stayed in for a frustrating 15 seconds. Rosberg, a heavy smoker, could perhaps be supplied with an attachment to his helmet through which he could take a few quick drags at such moments. He lost 4 places and came out 6th. Rosberg thrillingly set about getting his lost places back. Beloff's Tyrrell and De Angelis's Lotus he took in a single sweeping S-bend maneuver, which must have depressed both of them equally. Arnoux went past Piquet and back up to 3rd place. Rosberg went past Piquet all over again. Alboreto was busy lapping some very prestigious people. Piquet's engine split and erupted, a sight that was becoming sort of familiar already. Alboreto ran out the winner, the first Italian to win any Grand Prix in a Ferrari for 18 years. Warwick was 2nd and Arnoux's 4th became a 3rd when Rosberg ran out of gas half a lap from home. There were 2 Ferrari drivers on the dais, and Alboreto was perhaps justified in sounding a shade cocky.
We start now in the championship.
Nobody knew it yet, but that was the last time both the McLarens would fail to finish. The San Marino Grand Prix was, as usual, effectively an alternative Italian Grand Prix, being held at Imola so that the Italian Ferrari fans could congregate in great numbers and hurl abuse at all the other cars. A packet of 20 cigarette girls. Prost, not being Italian, looked nervous. Warwick winked bravely. De Cesaris twitched. Cheever stayed cool, but he had to jump ship, having discovered fire in the engine room. He took his form-fitting seat with him to a new car while the old one smouldered. Prelude to space. Next year's microchip Renault mechanic was already running as a prototype. Piquet was on the pole again, but when the green light went, Lauda's McLaren was slow getting away, and Prost led Piquet into the Tamburello, followed by the 2 Renaults with Arnoux's Ferrari between them. This was some consolation for the Tifosi, who had been thrown into despair by the horrible sight of Alboreto starting from 13th place owing to trouble in practice. Tambay skated off, having been nudged by Chiva at an awkward moment. While Tambay got on the radio to France, the rest of the field explored the Disneyland thrills of the Aqua Minerale chicane. Tambay ran the gauntlet of the sporting Italian crowd. Chiva made a pit stop to fix the flat he incurred when hitting Tambay. Prost was in a motor race of his own. Rosberg was in a walking race of his own. But the wily Lauda was in the picture. Alboreto was up to 5th place by now, but Lauda took it off him. Arnoux was in 4th place and Lauda took that off him. 2 Ferraris seen off by 1 McLaren, a ghastly spectacle to Italian eyes. Alas for Lauda, the early strain on the starting grid now revealed itself in terminal symptoms. As if picking up a last squeal of distress from his teammates' expiring electronics, Prost contracted a case of bad brakes and spun, but he kept revving and ran on. Piquet lost 2nd place to Warwick. Alboreto packed it in. Piquet didn't give up. He got 2nd place back from Warwick, who had been advised by radio to lift his foot. Prost came in for a routine pit stop. Arnoux took 4th place from Fabi, some compensation for the Ferraristi. Arnoux took 3rd place from the now economy-minded Warwick. Piquet came in with a blown turbo and no World Championship points. Fabi blew his turbo on the same lap, as if to prove that the Brabhams were reliably unreliable. Prost was the winner, a whole lap ahead of Warwick, who in addition to his fuel shortage had also lost 4th gear. But Arnoux's Ferrari was 2nd, so it was not a complete catastrophe for the Italian crowd, merely a disaster. 3rd man De Angelis ran out of fuel, as did De Cesaris and Chiva. But the champagne was in plentiful supply. Prost was 1st in the championship, Warwick 2nd, and Lauda still only 5th. Next stop, Dijon for the French Grand Prix. To make practice more interesting, it rained. Dijon, though twisty, is a quick circuit, but not when it is full of water. Emerging from the waves came a new Tolman that was eventually to prove highly competitive. But of course it had a lot to compete against. On race day it fined up. Tombay's Renault was on the pole, then De Angelis, Piquet, Rosberg and Prost, with Lauda back in midfield as usual. On the green light, Tambay and Piquet both had clutch creep. Tambay was boxed in, but he still managed to bodge his way through and take up an impressive lead, which he was to hold for 48 laps. Thus showing what the Renault could do when everything in it was working at once. Behind Tambay came De Angelis and Mansell with a Lotus each, followed by Rosberg, who spent the whole race earning no points at all for making the Williams Honda look drivable, which everyone, including Frank Williams, knew it really wasn't. first three charged on unchangingly, but Rosberg inevitably relinquished fourth place, which was filled by Tambay's teammate Warwick, although Prost's McLaren loomed in Warwick's right-hand mirror as Prost pulled out to go past Piquet into fifth place. Alboreto was out of it and spun off to underline the fact. Next, it was Lauda's turn to go past Piquet. Lauda was assisted in this maneuver by Piquet's turbo, which cooperatively blew up. Piquet pedalled the wrecked Brabham back to the pits so that it could catch fire properly in front of Gordon Murray. Piquet was tasting more foam than champagne and had added a fifth zero to his points total. Eating up Tombay's lead, Prost had a loose wheel that put him over the curb. He came straight in to have things put right. Tambay scooted away to safety. Tambay by now was in amongst the back markers. But Prost just sat there while 4 penneth of stripped thread dropped him from second to 10th place. Tambay steamed on. Prost at last got back in amongst it. But the McLaren on Tombay's tail now belonged to Lauda. Lauda pressured Tambay into a turn wider than the curve. Alboreto gave up. Lauda came in for an 18-second stop that was quicker than Prost's, but too slow to keep Tambay from nipping back into the lead. But why was Shearer's arrows stationary? Lauda was away again in second place. Shearer's arrows was stationary because Warwick's Renault had used it as a launching pad for a parabolic flight into the catch fencing. The front suspension came through the monocoque, but only bruised Warwick's leg instead of breaking it. Meanwhile, Lauda retook the lead from Tambay. The McLarens just had more of everything. Lauda won a race that Prost might have won, and Prost might have finished closer behind if his wheel hadn't worked loose again, a trivial fault which the now dominant-looking McLaren organisation made sure didn't recur. Mansell was a brave third, Tambay a worthy second, and Nicky the Rat had almost satisfied even his high standards.
Screwed up a lot of time in the pits, to be honest.
Monaco in the sunlight. Take a good look at what the place can offer when it isn't raining. Nobody realized, as the ancient Bugattis circulated, that when the big day came, the modern cars would go incomparably slower. Race day brought the rain. Prost and Mansell lined up beside the stake boats, with the two Ferraris behind them, then the Renaults and then Lauda and Piquet. When the green light glimmered, they rode away roughly in that order, except Warwick's Renault came right around the outside and disappeared around the first curve just in time to clip Arnoux' Ferrari. Arnoux got away with it, but Warwick rammed the barrier. Then Tambay rammed Warwick as De Angelis' Lotus and Patrese' Alpha waited politely at the roadblock while planning an alternative itinerary. Warwick got out and limped off, favouring the leg he'd hurt at Dijon. Arnoux impinges on Warwick in this only slightly slow motion notion of how Prost looked leading the field up the rapids. Tambay now had a cracked leg to match Warwick's. Prost's McLaren and Mansell's Lotus kicked up a rainforest. Further back, Arnoux and Alboreto in the Ferraris felt their way through it. Tambay had a new vehicle. Warwick showed him how to work it. But now Lauda the Water Rat was up amongst the Ferraris. At Lowe's corner he snatched the short line off Alboreto and squeezed him out. Lauda dealt with Arnoux going up the hill past Rosie's. Hainault's Ligier had already lost its nose cone when it found Patrese' Alpha suddenly athwart its hawse. But Hainault got round, and so did Piquet, fishtailing with unusable power on his way to another big fat zero. Alboreto had less luck at the Mirabeau, where he sat for some time watching the boat race go by. Rosberg was now running well in 6th position, Senna's Tolman squirting along in his wake. This was electrifying stuff from Senna, and all took due note of a hot shoe debut. Nigel Mansell in his Lotus had by this time grabbed the lead from Prost McLaren. This was the first time Mansell had ever led a Grand Prix, and he obviously liked the whole idea. A real English rain king like Sterling Moss, Mansell skated through the tunnel which had been specially sluiced down so as to present a road surface fully as lousy as the one outside. But just in front of Rosie's he came unstuck. Mansell toured round with a bent rear wing. But he had 2 punctured tyres as well, so it was only a matter of time before Prost went past and Mansell went off. Elsewhere, Lauda's left-hand mirror now showed an approaching cloud of spray, which surprisingly turned out to be Senna in the Tolman, sailing confidently by. Mansell, who had been sitting there in the cockpit while the rain filled it up like a hip bath, decided to step outside while he figured out what to do next. Eventually he concluded that his delinquent rear tyre should be punished. Somewhere inside the jacuzzi that men called the tunnel under Lowe's Hotel, Rosberg's white Williams found itself being annoyed by new boy Stefan Belloff's black Tyrrell. As they shot out towards the harbour, Belloff went scooting past Rosberg and looked as if he could do that to a few more big names as well. But Lauda wouldn't be one of them, because he spun at the casino, Stallsville. Belloff went past Arnoux at the Mirabeau. Up ahead, Senna had done fastest lap and was closing on Prost, but at this rate Belloff would soon be closing on both of them. Prost was still in front, a lap ahead of Alboreto, but Senna was clearly visible behind him to anyone wearing spearfishing goggles. Because now it really started to rain. On lap 31, clerk of the course Jackie Ickx, himself a great rain driver, took a hotly debated decision to stop the race early before someone drowned. Perhaps he just didn't want to see anyone run out of gas. If the race had gone on, Senna would probably have won it, and Prost been second instead of first. But if Prost, instead of half points for first in a short race, had got full points for second, it might have made a big difference to the World Championship at the end of the year. If. F1 is if spelled backwards. But on the dais, young Senna took his loss well enough, perhaps bowing to the dignified example of Prince Rainier, who has really lost something. And Prost was taking victory with dignity. He was now a whole 10 points ahead of Lauda in the World Championship, with Arnoux and Warwick even further back. For the 7th round in the race for the great prize, back across the pond to Montreal, where Nigel Mansell was reminded that when flying the Atlantic first class, a driver should turn down every second meal. The Ferraris had broken out in suede accessories. The Brabhams had a sharky-looking new nose-mounted oil cooler. Piquet won the pole position, which was sort of standard, but what he really wanted was a victory, because Ascari's record of winning the World Championship one year and no point at all the next wasn't one that he wanted to equal. It wouldn't be understood in Brazil. Gordon Murray had designed the most powerful Grand Prix car ever seen, but the man sitting inside was becoming a bit anxious about whether it would ever stay in one piece. In the Williams pit there was any amount of Japanese expertise, but Rosberg and Lafitte wanted to know when the car would steer straight. Frank Williams couldn't answer that question, so he talked about something else.
Maybe the other trick is you could be in what time's no, it's too late. Well, no, you could do a day flight.
At the green light, Piquet was outgunned by Prost on the way to the first quick bends. Behind them came De Angelis's Lotus, the 2 Ferraris, and then Mansell in the other Lotus, with Lauda back in his usual middle position. The engine of Prost McLaren wasn't at its sharpest, but he looked pretty comfortable up at the front. Prost was self-confessedly flabbergasted, therefore, when Piquet went past and pulled away by no more complex expedient, apparently, than just treading on the gas. It was a reminder that if the Brabham BMW could get some reliability to match its power, then the McLarens might still be required to step down. Behind the two leaders, Alboreto got in front of De Angelis, who was now sandwiched between the two Ferraris, with Mansell in fourth place, which meant that Arnoux was sandwiched between the two Loti. They forged on in that order, while Lauda, far back out of camera range, was doing his usual circumspect climb to eminence. Prost did his brilliant best to stay in touch with Piquet, but the McLaren had a bit less urge than usual, and the Brabham seemed to have even more. Alboreto sputtered to a halt with a NAF fuel pump, his mood perhaps not improved by the pain from his mouth, which an Italian motor racing journalist had helpfully punched not long previously. Warwick swept past De Angelis, two Renault engines in different chassis. But Piquet was supreme. Prost was only just still in there. And Lauda was coming further into the picture. Now it was Arnoux' turn to go past De Angelis. Arnoux set off after Piquet and Prost, but they were a long way away and his tyres weren't up to it. Mansell got in front of his teammate De Angelis, but both of them were lapped by Piquet. Meanwhile, Lauda had caught right up with Prost, whose engine was definitely off song. So despite the presence of the lapped Loti, it was really Piquet leading from the McLaren duo, with Lauda ahead of Prost. At this point, De Angelis took a shortcut across a corner. This was a bold tactic, but very nearly removed Lauda from the race. Lauda recovered, but it must have been a shock. Cheever's Alpha had failed the fuel economy test, and he used it as a surfboard to see if it would do better that way. Piquet, having led for 70 laps from flag to flag, came home to the 9 points he deserved, with nothing broken this time except a hoodoo. The new oil cooler had toasted his talented feet, but he was smiling like St. Lawrence. Detroit, and although the McLaren team were miles ahead in the Constructors' Championship, their drivers had something to worry about. Piquet.
For construction, has been some concern among the drivers about dust and so on, making the course just a little bit slippery.
Paul Newman, a redoubtable driver in his own right, toured the pits and gave everyone a chance to wonder how Rosberg could be half the age of a film star and yet look twice as old. Maybe it was his moustache. The promising Brundle in his Tyrrell. The promising Beloff in his Tyrrell. Brundle and Beloff out of their cars for a lecture from Jackie Stewart about why Princess Anne wears a Rolex. Farby's Brabham caught fire before the race had even started. De Cesaris's Ligier hit the Armco with its throttle jammed open. De Cesaris carried his saddle back to the spare car. A beautiful day and a beautiful river and a less beautiful circuit, and once again Piquet was on the pole with Prost beside him. At the light, however, the third qualifier Nigel Mansell thought he saw a gap between the two front runners. There was a gap there, but it was a few inches narrower than a Lotus. The result was a major shunt. Mansell got away safely behind De Angelis and Prost, but Piquet was back where he'd started with Shearer's arrows T-boned dolefully into him. Alboreto's Ferrari wasn't doing very much either. Doomy-looking flags went out, which gave the watching world time to look at the action replay. It now became clear that Mansell had stripped a wheel off Piquet, who then hit Alboreto. Mercifully, Piquet's loose wheel didn't kill Senna. Instead, it just bounced about, reminding everybody, especially one presumes Mansell, that life is short enough already. On the restart, Piquet got away smoothly, although Prost found that Mansell was no whit abashed. Prost held Mansell off, however. Then came Alboreto's Ferrari, followed by Cheever's Alfa. De Angelis and Warwick cheap by Joule, and only then Lauda. The Williamses were even further back. On they surged in roughly that order, with Cheever showing up well, now that the Alfa, untroubled for once by consumption requirements, was delivering the power of the previous year. Winkelhock's ATS liked the look of our cameraman and came straight over to have a chat. Everyone else pushed off around the circuit. Winkelhock got out and wondered what else there was to do in Detroit at that hour. Winkelhock was to be only the first wreck of the day. Piquet led everyone safely through the chicane. But at a less tricky part of the circuit, Jonathan Palmer's punctured tyre led him into an altercation with the Armco. Piquet was still trying to get rid of Prost, who felt the same way about Mansell. Then came Warwick, dogged by Alboreto, who was haunted by Cheever. This was tight, exciting stuff, and became more so when Mansell not only got up behind Prost on lap 10, but actually got past him. Then Cheever solved his Alboreto problem. For several laps, Mansell closed on Piquet in a most interesting manner, but the Lotus's gearbox couldn't stand the excitement. Prost stopped for tyres and came straight out again. De Cesaris in the Ligier had a spin and showed a touch of his old form by clouting the wall on recovery. Mansell's Lotus came into the pits for a permanent stay, and he climbed out. Beloff's Tyrrell was in 5th place until the whole wheel went flat. It was the chicane that did it. Brundle in the other Tyrrell went past Warwick. But that had at least something to do with the Renault's old enemy, its own gearbox. Running second after yet another Prost pit stop, Alboreto was closing on Piquet, but a split intercooler finally put him out. There were only 6 cars left in the race, and one of them was Brundle's Tyrrell, which went past Angelis's Lotus into 2nd place. With not far to go, Prost unlapped himself just in time to hold Piquet up while Brundle got closer. He got very close. But not quite close enough. So Detroit was a nothing race for the McLarens, whereas the Brabhams, or one Brabham anyway, seemed to be back in business. Brundle was understandably beside himself. Piquet merely looked relieved. 4th in the championship after De Angelis wasn't a lot for Piquet, but it was something. The Grand Prix circus moved south to Dallas. This was the first time the Dallasites had ever played host to a Grand Prix, and they were perhaps under the impression that a racing driver... The Formula One teams were glad enough to be able to visit the historic buildings. Local girls seemed able to bounce up and down without sweating. But the drivers needed ice and cold drinks as the temperatures climbed to 100 outside the car and 140 inside. She was all right, and so was he. The cars could be wrapped like chocolate bars to stop the fuel evaporating, but the drivers suffered from the heat. Worse than that, they suffered from the track, which was a mess. The State Fair Park circuit crumbled like cheese. American know-how was loudly whistled in to repair the damage, but it was all very last minute and last gasp. The usual rule had been waived about testing a new Grand Prix circuit with a lesser event first. The usual rule was thus proved, expensively, to be a good rule. There was some talk of a boycott, but the race went on, as it had to, because the stars from Dallas were present in person. Mansell's Lotus was on the pole with teammate De Angelis beside him. The Loti led away, followed by Warwick's Renault, Senna's Tolman, and the McLarens of Lauda and Prost, with Rosberg sixth. Arnoux should have been up there too, but his Ferrari had a misfire on the parade lap and had to start from the back, an annoyance which fired him up for what was to be a spine-tingling performance. For now, though, he was nowhere in evidence. Nor was Piquet. Mansell, De Angelis and Warwick steamed on through the heat. The sliding surface gave way under Senna, who in practice had kept going only by filling his overalls with ice cubes. Rosberg was already in between the two McLarens as Senna resumed the race going backwards. And already up in contention was the extremely audacious Arnoux. The concrete walls made every corner a blind one. There were places where the surface was so bad that the right line was the only line, so they all had to queue up. But where there were two lanes, things still happened, such as Warwick passing De Angelis into second place. Lauda, Rosberg and Prost led Alboreto in a rally cross as the circuit continued to disintegrate. Brundle's Tyrrell having crashed in practice, now it was the turn of Beloff. On the 10th lap, the charging Warwick tried to scoop in Mansell, but finished up against a wall of tastefully painted tyres. The wall-banging Mansell's mirrors weren't empty, however. He had Lauda after him, and also his teammate De Angelis. De Angelis ran away from Lauda and for 3 laps harried Mansell, but Rosberg was after both of them, and he had the big advantage that his car handled like this on any circuit. By now, Tom Bay's leg was a bit better, but while running in 5th place, his Renault left a wheel behind, which somebody souvenired. Mansell was still fending off Rosberg with a thoroughness to which the Finn later took public exception. Prost, as was his right, took advantage of the situation, which didn't improve Keke's mood. The furious Rosberg got second place back again pronto. Mansell clipped the wall and faltered. Carried on by his own momentum, Rosberg went past Mansell into the lead. The 80,000 Texans present didn't realize how lucky they were to be getting all this instead of a mass walkout. Mansell didn't take it lying down, but it was his turn to face a shut door. Rosberg raised an arm in the time-honored Finnish gesture, which means sod off. Piquet, plagued by a jammed throttle, saw a little slip road just begging to be plugged by a Brabham. Mansell went in to replace his banged-up wheels. It looked as if Rosberg's dream was over when Prost gave him a galling demonstration of how well the McLaren comports itself. Alboreto clipped the concrete and got out to find how serious it was. Prost was still in front but slowing down because of a puncture, which the granular road surface didn't improve. He parked fraternally behind Alboretto's Ferrari. Sura's Arrows was on 3 wheels. Rosberg was now back in front. Boutsen and the other Arrows joined the parked car pool. Rosberg belted on. Lauda, currently third, also joined the parked car pool. Rosberg won the whole thing, with Arnoux a scarcely believable second, followed by De Angelis and Lafitte, whom it was good to see back among the points. Mansell, coming 5th, had no gears left in the box at all. Already exhausted, he tried to push the car home, but the heat had taken its toll. He lost 5th place to Ghinzani, but was given 6th, not just out of compassion, but because there was scarcely anything left out on the track except mangled wreckage. Rosberg, who could go through hell and still stroll out asking for a light, chose the victory dais as the spot from which to tell Mansell off. A private get-together was what those two needed, but it's hard to resist a microphone.
I don't think it's Formula One tactics what he was using. With Prost and myself, it was no problem. Alan put his nose once alongside me. I give him away because he's quicker. And that's the way we operate in F1. Last 2 or 3 laps might be a different story, but not right in the beginning.
Back to Europe and an obscure little country called Britain. The July sun shone bright on Brands Hatch. The Tyrrells were present, Beloff in one of them and Johansson taking over from the injured Brundle. But Balestri wanted the Tyrrells punished for fiddling their ballast at Detroit, so there was trouble brewing. There was real trouble for Cecotto, who crashed his Tolman and hurt his legs badly. Piquet, however, was on the pole again. Every pole sitter was given a free motor scooter by Emanuela, which meant that she was in Piquet's company continuously. Someone, somewhere, wants a message from you. On the light, Piquet and Prost in the front row led away from Lauda and De Angelis, followed by Warwick and Arnoux. Down from Druids they all swept smoothly, all except Patrese, who got sideways, pushing his teammate Chiva wide. Alio's Ram took off and landed in a nearby field. Piquet hurtled on but couldn't get away from Prost. Lauda was also up there, just ahead of Warwick and De Angelis. Piquet, Prost and Lauda became a threesome. Then Prost outbraked Piquet at Paddock and went ahead. While Piquet was still getting over his astonishment, Lauda went past him at the next corner. But Jonathan Palmer's crashed Ram caught fire, and the marshals couldn't put it out without flooding the road with suds. So the race was stopped. Piquet was already coming in for tyres when the flag went out, but the restart was based on where they were the lap before that, when he was first. So Piquet was on the pole again. This time, Prost outdragged him to the first corner. Prost, Piquet, Lauda and the 2 Renaults, but really only the McLarens and the Sandwich Brabham were ever in it for first place. In the course of time, Lauda took second place off Piquet. Piquet fought back around Druids, but to no avail. Back in midfield, the two Ferraris provided extra thrills when they both came up against the Ligier of de Cesaris. Some said it was two brains against one, and others said that the odds were even greater. But up at the front, the sight was all too familiar. Prost ahead of Lauda, but both ahead of everybody. Or was it? Lauda went ahead of Prost. So did Sura's Arrows, which was a lap behind. Then Piquet went past Prost, who was going backwards. It was the gearbox, a common ailment for the Lotus and the Renaults, but rare for the McLarens. Piquet kept chasing Lauda, but his Brabham had its nth case of turbo trouble. Warwick came through to a timely second place, but it was Lauda's 22nd Grand Prix victory from 151 starts, and he'd now scored more World Championship points than anybody ever. Tombé's Renault was mildly on fire. Warwick was happy with his offspring. Lauda was only 1.5 points behind Prost in the World Championship, and young Ayrton Senna was already getting good at squirting the champagne. The German Grand Prix was at Hockenheim, a hot shoe circuit with an average lap of 130 miles per hour plus in a suitable vehicle. The weather was good, so Lauda watched TV outside while Prost worked on a tan. De Angelis had just been trying his Lotus for size. Back in my homeland, a man built like that would be called snake hips. I would have been able to get in there myself once. Mansell must have been praying for rain, because on race day it rained for 1.5 minutes on the grid. Prost was on the pole with De Angelis beside him, then the two Renaults of Warwick and Tombé. Warwick almost Manselled his way through to the front, but in the end it was De Angelis who nabbed top spot. In the second chicane it was De Angelis, Prost, Piquet, Warwick, Tombé, Senna, Alboreto and Lauda. De Angelis led into the stadium with Prost in close touch, although Piquet was now ahead of both the Renaults, followed by Senna's Tolman and Alboreto in the first Ferrari. De Angelis, Prost and Piquet were a threesome, with Warwick only just in contact. But he was more in contact than Senna, who lost a wing on the quick part of the Ostkurve and went off backwards at 170 miles per hour into the Armco. Instead of dropping to his knees and offering up thanks, he got cross. With Senna gone, Lauda closed up to 5th behind Warwick, but all eyes were to the front. Could De Angelis keep it up? Maybe he could, but the Lotus couldn't. The turbo took the count. Prost now had the lead, but Piquet wanted it too. Prost did his best to run away from Piquet. While De Angelis did his best to drive a bonfire all the way back to the pits. Piquet got past Prost, and there wasn't a lot that the Frenchman could do about it. He'd chosen his tyres too conservatively, and Piquet is simply very good at driving fast. De Angelis' Lotus continued to burn up, along with his hopes of the championship. Gardner's Ocello achieved fleeting prominence. Mansell, having started 17th, went past Arnoux into 6th place. Piquet's gearbox went sour and Prost closed in, nor was Lauda very far away. A lap later, Prost had got past Piquet and Lauda was closer still. Then Lauda went past Piquet too. For the Brabham, a Duff gearbox was at least a variation on the usual blown turbo. Piquet went into the pits making the signal for a standard tyre change. The mechanics performed brilliantly, replacing all 4 wheels in 2 pulls of a lamb's leg. Only then did Piquet climb out of the car. It is not known how hard Bernie and Gordon laughed at this. Prost turned down the boost and came home first. 3 more championship points ahead of Lauda, who was second. Warwick was third and Mansell a remarkable 4th. McLaren's now had the Manufacturers' Championship almost in the trophy cabinet. The Drivers' Championship was obviously going to be between 2 men in the same kind of car, unless De Angelis got lucky every time. Austria, and the fastest circuit in the calendar, the Österreich-Ring in Styria. The Red Arrows weren't all that much faster than the cars, which were qualifying at about 155 miles an hour. A Harrier took a sniff before descending vertically as advertised. The assembled Austrians would rather have applauded Lauda, but they were glad enough to give the reigning world champion a hand when he climbed out of the cockpit wearing a funny hat. He had just won another motor scooter for pole position, and perhaps he wanted a Harrier too. Something went wrong with the lights at the start, and De Angelis got left on the grid. Prost got ahead of Piquet, followed by Lauda and Senna, sensationally up from 10th. Nobody had any plans to stop for tyres or run out of gas. By this stage of the season, those problems were largely licked. Technology had made the usual giant strides, but it was all made a nonsense of by a dud set of starting lights. The race got stopped, although not before Rotengatter's Spirit had done a spell as a combine harvester. So they all lined up again, topped up with fuel, got out of the cars and waited.
Yeah, so red, green, yellow, red.
Yeah, I got to do a second gear left now.
Piquet seemed to be transmitting to Gordon Murray the details of some sort of scheme. Piquet led the field away on the slowest warm-up lap since the 40 days in the wilderness. He had seen the McLarens change tyres and didn't want them to get scrubbed in. There was nothing the rest of the drivers could do about this except look at Austria and fill their helmets with fumes of outrage. At the restart, Piquet hung fire, letting Prost into the lead. But such was the urge of the Brabham that Piquet was back in front after the first corner, followed by Prost, Tambay, Warwick, De Angelis, Lauda, Mansell, Senna, Alboreto, Patrese, Rosberg and Arnoux. In a disconcertingly short time, Senna's Tolman appeared ahead of Mansell's Lotus, which wasn't in Mansell's script at all. Eventually, Prost and Lauda were in line astern behind Piquet. Rosberg came in with incurable understeer. De Angelis in fourth place blew his engine and dumped oil on the Jochen-Rindt-Kurve. Piquet hit the oil and twitched. Prost, steering with one hand because he was holding fourth gear in with the other, hit the same oil and came off, a fateful slip-up. Lauda now closed up on Piquet, who was coming up to lap Alboreto at 180 miles an hour. Piquet was balked for a tiny moment. Piquet was irritated into an error. And Lauda went by, to the huge delight of the whole of Austria, who haven't loved anyone so much since the Emperor Franz Josef. Lauda looked all set for first place, but his gearbox must have picked up hypersonic vibrations from Prost's, because suddenly it gave out altogether. Lauda stirred the stick, however, and found all the gears again except fourth. Piquet had dropped back with bald tyres, so Lauda came home first, with Piquet second and Alboreto filling third spot, after the unfortunate Tombay succumbed yet again to a bad engine. It was Lauda's first ever win in front of the home crowd, and on top of that it was also the first time he had got ahead in the 1984 World Championship. On to Holland and happy hippie Zandvoort. Avoiding the traffic jams, some came to the circuit on foot. Some approached by sea. Zandvoort can be a windy place, but the local drivers have adapted to the conditions. Race day was fine enough for Renault's Larousse to wear shades. Rosberg was breathing fire as usual. To cool him down, the Williams engineers installed a cold drink system in his car so that he could suck juice through his helmet. Mansell had just been told that the Williams team would have a drink button for him next year too. Rosberg was reported to be less than crazy about this prospect, but the talking point receded into the background as they revved up for the start. Prost was on the pole, then Piquet, De Angelis, Warwick, Tombay and Lauda. Piquet had his usual clutch lag but still led away. Tombay charged forwards, Lauda went backwards, so as they headed off into the dunes, it was Piquet, Prost, Tombay, De Angelis, Warwick, Rosberg, Lafitte and Alboreto. Piquet was on soft tyres and couldn't be caught. Prost, more conservative as usual, was on hard tyres and had to pedal to keep up at all. The great thing about Zandvoort is that the cars can get past each other in a corner even after 200 mile an hour straight, so quite frequently they look as if they're racing. De Cesaris, of course, is always racing, whatever the circumstances, so Cheever was perhaps not all that surprised to find himself nudged onto the grass. Piquet and Prost were way out in front, but Lauda moved up past De Angelis. Then Lauda went past Tombay into fourth place behind Rosberg. Piquet hadn't blown a turbo, it only looked that way. What he had was an oil leak. Piquet's season was going up in smoke. Rosberg had done wonders, but Lauda had the wheels. Piquet walked home without obvious rancor, a graceful loser whose growing self-control makes him ever more formidable. Tombay lapped the ATS of Winkelhock, who Winkel locked up a back wheel in surprise, and so induced a certain amount of understandable trepidation in De Angelis. Theo Fabi in the other Brabham was moving up aggressively when he spun at Tarzan, but he kept the motor turning and drove on towards a fine 5th place. Boots and Arrows, on the other hand, found it hard to go on in this condition. The frustrated Chiva also packed it in. So Prost came home with his 4th Grand Prix win of the year, but Lauda was 2nd, so he was still marginally ahead in championship points. Rosberg had gone out with fuel famine, but Mansell well deserved his 3rd place. And up there too, looking as enchanting as ever, was Monsieur Balestre. De Angelis was still theoretically in the championship, but in fact it was now between the 2 McLaren drivers, so McLarens couldn't lose, and indeed the Constructors' Championship was now officially all theirs. The 2nd Italian Grand Prix was called the Italian Grand Prix and held at Monza, which, even with 3 silly chicanes added, yields practice laps of 140 miles an hour and more. The McLaren team arrived going more slowly than that, but looking hard to stop. The Ferraris unloaded after the short trip from Maranello. The Ferraristi took nourishment before the big challenge to their vocal cords. Even to non-Italian eyes, there's something about a Ferrari. Piquet was after his 7th pole position. Bernie and Gordon were all for it, but they rather hoped Piquet would get more to keep than just his growing collection of identical motor scooters. A rainy Friday put the skids under a lot of people. Mansell wasn't the only one, which must have been a relief to him. Warwick also did a pirouette. So did Rotengatter, with flames added. Haino got further round than anybody, only to find himself behind Alio's evaporating ram. Senna had signed for Lotus while still under contract to Toleman. The Toleman team had canned him, so he was explaining instead of driving. The great Fangio arrived. He won this race 3 years running when Monza was a monster. Now he faced Balestre. Piquet got another motor scooter, but Prost was right there beside him in 2nd spot. Although on the green light, De Angelis with a hot new Renault engine did a Mansell between them. But Piquet trod on the power and led away into the first lap, followed by De Angelis, Prost, Tombay and Mansell, with Lauda starting slowly. He had a bad back and a long race for it to get worse in if he overdid things early on. Piquet stretched out into the lead. The Ferraris had qualified even behind the Alphas, so a lot of the Tifosi had gone home. Piquet had a brutto momento in the Lesmo curves and may have fractured a component at this point. Prost got closer to Piquet until his engine blew like a Brabham. No points. He looked for a nice quiet place to park where the sporting spectators wouldn't throw stones at him, but he couldn't find it, and they did. Fabi, on his mettle in the other Brabham, was running a fast 3rd to Tombay when he overdid it going into a chicane. As at Zandvoort, though, Fabi kept the show on or near the road. He dropped back to 9th, but was soon leaving Alboreto behind all over again. Mansell's Lotus took a dust bath. Piquet still led Tombay, who had coped well with being blacked out by oil spray when Prost's engine blew. But Piquet's Brabham began to make smoke. It was a cracked radiator, probably incurred during that bad moment at Lesmo. Tombay went by into the lead. De Angelis having conked out, Lauda had quietly moved up to second place, but Fabi was definitely back in business. Back in the pits, Piquet was walking away. No points, just another motor scooter. Tombay scorched on, his heavy breathing no doubt being listened to on the Quai d'Orsay. But Lauda, the master strategist, having weighed the prospect of 9 points against the pain they would cause his strap back, ceased playing for safety and cranked up the boost. He outran Fabi into second place. He lapped at 140 plus and outran Tombay into first place. Fabi's engine died of disappointment. Tombay went out with a bent throttle. The Italian crowd lustily cheered these two retirements. But Lauda, winding it down now to favour his aching spine, cruised home behind a back marker to first place, with Alboretto's Ferrari in second place. So for the Ferrari fans, the day wasn't all disaster. It was for Chiva, whose Alfa ran out of fuel, letting Patresi's Alfa into third place. If Lauda couldn't exactly smell the World Championship yet, Prost could smell the loss of it, because Monza was where he started losing it the last time. That half-point lead of Lauda's might just be the thin end of the wedge. Prost was running out of races, but there were still two left. The first of them was at the Nürburgring, which used to look like this 50 years ago, in the days when the Mercedes and auto unions convinced the world that Hitler couldn't be all bad. He could, of course, but it never has been easy to keep a level head when the engines are howling. But Germany's second Grand Prix of 1984, called the European Grand Prix, was run on the new, or Neue, Nürburgring, a computer-designed, snooker-smooth mini offshoot of the old, or Alt one. The old one was where Lauda crashed, burned, and almost died, something that would have led mere mortals to avoid the area.
No, because if you either overcome an accident 8 years ago, you do overcome it. If you don't overcome it in 8 years, you will never overcome it. So basically, I come here normal. Sure, that's the place where I had my accident, but really, it doesn't bother me.
Of course, the circuit's completely new. It's a different thing altogether. What do you think of the new Nürburgring?
I think it's very good. It's one of the safest circuits in the world. The layout is very good. I think it's the ideal circuit for a Grand Prix.
There was a growing consensus that the new track was safe and nothing else, but if anyone had a right to his opinion, it was Lauda. Prost, his work cut out, suited up. Hand signals explained to him why the new engine would be even better than the one he had half an hour ago. Rain tyres were on for practice because the Eiffel weather was running true to its October form. Race day was sunny, but Prost bent his car in the warm-up. On such a safe circuit, he'd hit a safety car. But they straightened the McLaren out before the race. So Piquet was on the pole with Prost beside him, then Tombay and Rosberg in the second row. Lauda had vile luck in practice and started 15th. Tombay almost fought his way through, but Prost was leading as some of the field went round the S-bend. Five cars, however, chose the scenic route after Senna's Tolman took off from the back of Rosberg's Williams. Senna and Rosberg were both out. Rosberg hated the circuit anyway, as an insult to Finland. Prost took command of the remaining cars. Senna reassembled the Tolman. After Prost came Tombay, Piquet, Warwick, the Ferraris and the Alfas. But Lauda was already up from 15th to 9th, and he made it 8th when he split the Alfas. He was 6th when he split the Ferraris and closed up on Alboretto, who was trying to snatch 4th place from Warwick. Under pressure, Warwick missed a gear, but still held Alboretto off. Alboretto held Lauda up. Lauda, who knew that Prost was running away with it up at the front, uncharacteristically let impatience get the better of him. So he was human after all. It was a reminder that there's a lot of temperament under all that self-mastery. 20 seconds ahead of Tambay, Prost had the race in the bag and the championship back within reach. Piquet had a bad gear linkage, but Tambay had a misfire, so Piquet caught him and went past into second place. Mansell was in 6th place when his engine blew up and dumped oil from which it spun off, comprehensively on fire underneath. The marshals were good at waving flags, but the ones holding the fire extinguishers held back shyly. Finally, Mansell persuaded them to approach close enough so that he could borrow an extinguisher and set to work. Half a minute up on Piquet and Alboreto, Prost, already thinking of Portugal, cruised to victory. Piquet and Alboreto were both running out of petrol and shimmied their cars to slosh any last smidgen into the fuel pumps. Alboreto won the economy run and took second place. Lauda came in 4th and made 3 very important points. Piquet and Alboreto knew that the fuel rules were foolish. But on the victory dais, Prost had graver matters to consider.
Yeah, I think it's very important to finish the championship in the last race. For me, I wanted to go to the last race and with no holidays, you know what I mean. And I did a good, very fantastic season. I did a good season, and I absolutely want to win the championship. And even if I do not win it, I want to go to Estoril with a chance. That's what I did today.
Lauda's lead soon looked even thinner than this. The Tyrrell ballast bust at Detroit could well have been a bad rap, but judgment had now been handed down and confiscated championship points had been redistributed. Lauda was now only 3.5 points ahead, which meant that if Prost finished first, Lauda had to be second or he would not be champion. The mathematics of it all were perhaps lost on some of the local entrepreneurs. And so, in every sense, it all came down to Estoril. The smart place to be was in the McLaren pit. Princess Stephanie was there, disguised as a boy. Lauda reckoned she was Prost's problem. Rain stopped practice, so the mechanics played football. The heavy police presence tried to confiscate the ball. Mansell got the ball back. Lauda and Prost disappointed the journalists by behaving like the gentlemen they both are. Piquet had won his 9th motor scooter, and once again Prost was beside him. Senna and Rosberg were in the second row. Lauda started from 10th, 9 places from the championship. Piquet goofed with the clutch, and Rosberg came sizzling down the outside to lead on the first curve from Mansell. Prost, Piquet, Senna, Alboreto, De Angelis, and the 2 Renaults. After the Renaults came Johansson's Tolman and both the Alphas, and only then Lauda in 13th place, 3 worse than when he'd started. Biding your time is one thing, but this looked like lethargy. Piquet spun off on the first lap and rejoined low down the field. Rosberg put distance between himself and Mansell, but Mansell could not do the same with regard to Prost, who eventually went by into second place. Lauda made progress as far as Johansson, who was running 6th. Prost slipstreamed Rosberg down the long straight and then outbraked him with cruel ease. Rosberg then found Mansell trying the same maneuver. Rosberg chopped Mansell out, crying the Finnish words for, "I remember Dallas, you pommy bastard." But on the next lap, Mansell's Lotus had what Rosberg's Williams hadn't. Held up for a long time by Johansson, Lauda remembered his mistake at the Nürburgring and didn't repeat it. Lauda bided his time for many laps and eventually saw daylight. Johansson butted him, but it was a farewell gesture. Lauda's next obstacle was in 5th place, Alboreto. But the long straight settled that. Prost had no one to overtake except back markers. But Lauda still had 3 cars between him and the championship, or 2 after he took Rosberg. Senna was running strongly in 3rd place, but he couldn't keep Lauda out of his slipstream. Lauda swept past Senna, but still had 1 car, Mansell's, between himself and the great prize. Alboreto spun off in 5th place, but kept going. Mansell's spin was more serious. One of his front brakes was grabbing. You could see smoke coming out of it when he got going again. This was all that Lauda could have hoped for, but that was no consolation to Mansell as Lauda raced by into 2nd place. Mansell did his bulldog breed best to get back what he had lost, but the brake had popped a caliper and soon threw him off definitively. Mansell kept going, but it was now clear that he was going only as far as the pits. Lauda couldn't catch Prost and didn't need to, so he prudently turned down the boost. Prost did the same and ran out an easy winner of the race, some compensation for the loss of the championship. Lauda came home to his 3rd World Championship, with the lapped Piquet and Rosberg, both ex-world champions themselves, saluting him like chase planes. The season had been almost a monopoly for the McLarens, but it had not been dull, mainly because Prost and Lauda had raced each other. If Fangio and Moss had been allowed to do that, or Andretti and Peterson, who knows what might have been. Senna looked as if he might belong up there, but Lauda and Prost had proved something. They were equals.
He was the toughest guy to beat, as far as I know. The toughest guy, so therefore this championship is the most important one for me.
How many times have I asked you not to call me at work? And that was how the story came out. The old hand won again, and the new boy has to wait. The old hand took victory as he takes defeat philosophically. In his own words, next year it all begins again. And really it's already next year. The new season starts here on the same day the old one ends. The race for the great prize never stops.